You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled, "The Predator Cubs Tried to Write Her Language." When she saw their mistakes, she framed the page HFY. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. They said the sky would fall before any human set foot on Zah'ra, and on the night Area Cade arrived, the sky obliged. Meteors like glowing nails stitched fire through the purple clouds while the shuttle screamed down on vectors nobody had used since the wars. Area strapped in, counting breaths. 32 seconds of turbulence before atmosphere, 16 before the heat shield sang, 3 before she came eye to eye with the predator world they warned her about in the academy. From space, Zah'ra was a bruise of jungles and glaciers. Up close, it was a cathedral of teeth. The city of Keldine rose from a gorge like a crown thrown away by a god, towers grown from black stone and threaded with veins of liquid fire. Every balcony bristled with watchers, Zah'ri, scaled and sinewed, eyes like cold emeralds in deep sockets. Their muzzles were lean with carnivore patience. Their hands ended in curved talons that flexed and released like breathing. Area touched the coin at her throat, a disk of tarnished copper stamped with the Earth language's crest. She had been sent to teach, not to survive a gauntlet. "Voice steadies hands," she whispered, the way her mother had taught her when long ago in a basement during a different war, sirens tried to pry childhood out of her. The ramp hissed. Cold air filled the shuttle, carrying an odor of metal and rain. A figure waited at the base, wrapped in a mantle of woven chain. The herald's crest spines formed a crown about his skull. He bared teeth expectantly and bowed, not a gesture of peace but of ritual. The Zah'ri didn't pretend to be human. "Teacher," he said in a careful approximation of Terran standard. "You were bid to come, you came. I am Vekar, third claw in the House of Peaks. The young gather, come before the hunt horn." Before the what? He glanced at the sky. Somewhere distant, a note like an animal learning music rose and broke. The horn. It calls the packs to their evening run. They do not stop for guests. Area followed him into the throat of the city, under arches that the old translators called ribs and the young called bridges. The Zah'ri moved around her with the liquid caution of apex creatures, granting a smaller predator space. They did not fear humans, they didn't know how. Humanity had only come here twice before, once as conquerors, foolish and burning, and once as beggars after the fall, bringing books instead of bombs. At the academy, nobody wanted Zah'ra. The file was thick with warnings. The Zah'ri had no words for sanctuary or mercy. Their literacy was a shallow pool. Their poetry, if it existed, lived only in bone scars and shape of the hunt. They made deals in quiet caves where the light couldn't follow. They raised their young in communal dens whose rules could starve a philosopher. Area raised her eyes to the high banners. Each banner bore claw marks instead of sigils, a history written in tearing. She thought of the copper disc at her throat and the one lesson Earth had learned the hard way. The ones you fear teach you the most if you survive the lesson. They reached the House of Peaks, a building shaped like a cliff face someone had persuaded into hallways. Carrion birds circled above it, shining black in the dying light. Inside, a hall opened, long and high. At its far end waited the cubs. They were smaller than the adults, though small was a generous word. The tallest almost met her shoulder. They wore leather harnesses studded with tokens currency in their culture, fangs from prey, segments of bright beetle shell, coins hammered from ship plating. Their eyes were the smooth, astonished eyes of all young things, yet something in them remained older than Area's bones. They dared her the way cubs of any predator dared the world. "Make me learn you. Survive my teeth." Vekar stopped, lifting a hand. The cubs settled, though their tails flicked. Vekar's voice carried like stone rolling down a mountain. "Cubs of my blood and bond, the House of Peaks opens its claw. This is Area Cade of the shattered blue world. She brings marks that hold voices. She brings away to carry memory across death. This is dangerous and worthy, do not shame. Arya stepped forward. She placed the satchel of slates on a stone table. Her fingers trembled despite the breathing. She took one slate, thin as a leaf, black as Zah'ra's night. It woke under her touch, catching the hall's light and bending it into letters. "My name," she said, "is Arya." She drew the letters in strokes that felt like lifting. She said each sound, Arya. She pointed to her mouth, to the slate. "These marks are the voice made visible. They are a mirror you can carry." Silence moved in the hall like a new animal. A cub with a notch missing from one ear crept forward. He sniffed the slate. He touched Thea with the very tip of one claw and flinched. "It's caught," he murmured in Zah'ri, a language of clicks and low vibration. "The voice is caught." Arya placed the stylus in his hand. "Catch yours." This was the moment hard as returning to fire. She'd seen videos, she'd read papers, but none of that prepared her for a Zah'ri child bending over a human symbol, the way his breath shallowed when he recognized ownership. He wrote wrong. The R became a hinge, the I a tooth, the O a home that had lost a wall. The letters created a maze whose exit he couldn't find. But when he stepped back, his face held something she recognized, the ache of almost. The other cubs pressed in. Some hissed that it was trickery. Some bared milk fangs and laughed, yet each took a stylus. The hall erupted into scratching. Arya moved among them, adjusting wrist angle, murmuring sounds. Vekar stood with arms folded, unreadable as a cliff. In the doorway, older Zah'ri watched with the stillness of hunters testing wind. They learned like storms learn coastlines, by breaking them and breaking again. Their language defaulted to curves, crushes of sound, meaning carried by resonance in the chest. Terran standards sat in their mouths like a shard until persistence filed down the edges. When they said S, it became the hiss that meant you are close enough to pry my jaws open. When they said L, it fell like a stone. When they said H, the room changed temperature. Arya taught until the horn sent a shudder through the hall and every cub's head snapped to attention. The evening run. The packs gathered in the streets, their hunger folding silence like paper around it. Vekar tilted his head. "They must go," he said. "Pack shapes a cub's bones." Arya faced the cubs, their slates glowed on the stone like captured stars. "Take them," she said. "Riding doesn't stall hunger, it teaches you its name." Notchir looked torn, then tucked his slate under his harness with an awkward gentleness. The cubs thundered out past Arya and the watching elders, howling into streets that swallowed them whole. She stood alone in the ruin of a first day. Chalk dust streaked her sleeves. The table looked like a battlefield of mistakes. She should have been exhausted. Instead, something like song threaded her chest, a low defiance. They had tried. They had failed beautifully. Vekar walked to the table and picked up one slate. It was the one with the wrong R and tooth I, the missing its wall. He studied it, nostrils flaring. "This is your word." "It tries to be," Arya said. He angled the slate until the light ran its letters into a single gleam. "I have seen scars this shape on the bellies of cave bears," he said, "where a cub struck and missed. It's still a strike." He looked at her then, truly looked. "Humans," he said softly, almost to himself, "have the stubbornness of beasts that die standing." He put the slate back like laying a weapon down. "Tomorrow you will teach again." "Tomorrow I will teach again," Arya agreed. But tomorrow was not promised on Zah'ra. That night the moon ripped itself thin over the gorge. The run roared through the city like weather. Arya lay in her assigned niche in the House of Peaks, narrow, stone-soft, warm with the pulse of geotherm underfoot, and watched her breath mist. She held the copper disc and thought of the Academy's last words before the shuttle door closed. "Do not get attached." The Zah'ri devour their weak, their poetry, their history. You're there to observe, evaluate, advise. You are not there to love. She didn't know out loud if that last instruction was possible for her kind anymore. On the third day the skiff came from orbit, painted in the gray gold of the heirs of Dominion. Their emblem, the ring of stars broken by a single blade, winked against the sky. Arya felt her body go small, as if she were a child again in the cellar while the sirens learned her name. The last human-Dominion war had burned itself on Earth like a brand on a throat. It ended when the heirs withdrew to the inner systems, teeth and politics sharp as ever, and humanity learned to count its losses aloud. The Dominion hadn't come to Zah'ra since the treaty. They didn't like worlds they couldn't own. The skiff hovered above the plaza like a threat that hadn't decided what shape to take. The Zah'ri gathered in ranks, silent and straight. Vekar stood at their front, cloak lifted by updraft. Arya stood to the side, one among many, heart hitting her ribs exactly 3 times per breath. The skiff's door opened, and a woman stepped out wearing a uniform that made loyalty into architecture. Her hair was black peppered with silver. She wore power easily like a ring. She carried no visible weapon because she was the weapon. Zah'ra, she called, voice amplified by the skiff's belly. Today I bring a gift, a technique, a federation of trade that would lift your young by their throats into the light. Arya knew that tone. She'd heard it on the school feeds, clean as math, telling the survivors which districts would be rebuilt first and how to be grateful for that sequence. Vekar didn't bow. We have hunters, he said. We have stone and memory. We have our young. What do you offer that our teeth do not already hold? Letters, said the woman, and Arya's blood ran cold. Our letters, Dominion script. I see you have borrowed a human teacher. Charming. The alphabet she brings is a shackle. It binds thought to sound. It is primitive. The Dominion script records thought itself. Concepts without the mess of mouth. Efficiency, Zah'ri. Power. Trade routes open to those who sign as we do. Courts that favor those who speak our shapes. I offer you the future. You will write your treaties with us or not at all. A ripple passed through the Zah'ri ranks like hunger being reminded of itself. Vekar's jaws clicked once. He spoke quietly, but the gorge carried his voice even to Arya. We cut our own meat. You will cut it with our knives, the Dominion envoy said. Arya stepped forward before her caution could grip her ankle. Your script claims to record thought, she said, keeping her voice low so it traveled thin. But it requires your courts and your context to be read. It centralizes meaning. That is not literacy, that is dependency. The woman turned. Their eyes met the way 2 knives meet in a drawer, near enough to know, far enough to hate. And you are the human teacher, Arya Cade. We flagged your shuttle, thought you would keep your distance. Old habit, Arya said. I never learned how. The woman smiled. It was a winter thing. Be careful what you teach the Zah'ri, Arya. They do not thank, they take. Good, Arya said. So do we. The envoy's pupils tightened. A whisper of movement from the skiff belly told Arya that the envoy had merely to signal and here would be dead. But Zah'ra was not Dominion territory. The envoy stepped back, clasped her hands. We will establish a school of the heirs of Dominion, she said to the plaza. Those who learn with us will be measured and elevated. Those who refuse will remain under the claw and dark. Choose quickly. Trade is a river. Those who stand too long become stone. The skiff rose on a column of hot air that smelled like new riots. When it turned its intake toward the House of Peaks, Arya saw the envoy's face behind its plated glass. The expression was not anger. It was attention. Predators recognized each other even if they didn't share diets. The Zah'ri dispersed in currents. Vekar found Arya in the crowd without seeming to look. They offer knives, he said. They offer handcuffs made of pens, Arya said. We do not wear handcuffs. They are clever, Vekar. Their script makes you dependent on their lawyers and their trade. If you accept it, you can be rich for a time. But if they pull their context, you lose your voice. My letters are simple and crude. That's why they live anywhere. That's why they outlive anyone. He touched the copper disc at her throat with the back of one claw. How long have your letters lived? Long enough to hurt and heal a dozen civilizations, Arya said. Long enough to carry a song you want erased past the ears that want it gone. We are not singers, Vekar said. No, Arya said, thinking of the run at night. You are drums. He watched her for a long time. Teach, he said, teach harder. For the next 11 days, Arya worked until her hands remembered other wars. She moved among the cubs like someone trying to keep a candle lit in a rainstorm that didn't know it was rain. She made games the Zah'ri would not have called games. She marked their mistakes not with red, which they associated with an old blood oath, but with a pale blue that in their culture meant hunt again. She taped slates to the stone walls where they would catch just the right light at just the right hour. She wrote the cubs' names in large letters and beneath them their Zah'ri sounds and beneath those the transliteration into her letters and the meaning as best as gesture could catch it. They failed. They failed loudly and well. They turned BS into dens. They made E's that could cut a thumb if they were steel. They wrote backward, forward, in circles. They shouted at each other when understanding arrived like prey through brush. They invented instead of recited, which is the most human thing Arya had ever seen anything not human do. And then came the page. The cub with the notched ear, whose name was Raqqa if you were speaking Zah'ri and Knifelight if you translated it old-fashioned, stayed after the others had gone to sharpen their claws and sing the edge hum. He sat at the corner of the table, tongue curled in concentration, making the sound of R over and over, like a cat unlearning purr. Arya, he said softly. In the Terran he had beaten into obedience with effort and insult. I will write it. Your name, he said, not looking up. He set his jaw and drew the marks of Arya with the same seriousness he would have used to notch his first hunt bone. The A still leaned, missing a wall, the R still hinged, the I was less tooth and more spear now. The final A was almost there, so close that Arya's chest hurt to see it. He put the stylus down. This is you, he said, not your meat, the shape that hunts when you are not here. She laughed, then swallowed the laugh. Spirit, memory, yes. He looked from the slate to her face and something like a tremor went through him, a crack in the mask young predators wear so their elders keep loving them. If the skiff woman cuts your breath, he said, this stays. Arya didn't realize the room had thinned until then. Silence tightened like a noose. Vekar stood in the archway, arms folded, eyes narrow. Other elders had gathered, their stillness heavy. Zah'ri did not speak of death except as a part of hunting, and they did not speak of contingency unless war was near. Raqqa, Vekar said, voice level, go to your den. Raqqa's ears flattened. He scooped up the slate and thrust it at Arya like an oath. Keep. Then he fled into the city's dim. The elders said nothing. Arya held the slate and felt something ancient rearrange itself in her. She had never seen her name as a weapon. She had always thought of it as a candle. But in this hall, under these banners of torn cloth, her name written wrong by a predator child was a promise to the future that someone other than her would insist she had existed. Vekar stepped forward. They smell war, he said. The envoy again. Her skiff brings more skiffs, he said. Our scouts see on the ridge-tops the glint of more bellies. Dominion schools arrive hungry. They will offer food with lessons printed on it. Her knives will be sweet at first bite. He looked at Arya's hands around the slate. We have good claws, teacher, but claws cannot catch law. They want to bind us to court words. We do not understand court words. Then we teach you how, Arya said. He surprised her then by laughing, a sound like rocks calving into a river. You say it as if it were claws you can sharpen in an evening. Not an evening, Arya said, but we can sharpen one thing now. Tap the slate. This, what Raqqa made. Zah'ri do not write on paper, yes. Paper rots, Vekar said. Paper burns. Then we carve, Arya said. She spent the night with a chisel in her hand, speaking to stone the way she had once spoken to a hymnal. On a wide piece of slate cut from the wall itself, she carved the 4 letters of her name as Raqqa had written them. The lean-to A, the hinged R, the almost spear I, the last A, one wall stronger than the first. The lines were deep and honest. They did not pretend mastery. They said, I am the shape someone tried to teach in a dangerous house, and I survived. When she finished, her hands shook so hard she had to sit back on the floor. Vekar stood above her, arms crossed, shadow long. You honor a mistake, he said. "I honor a reach," she replied. He inclined his head. "We frame it," he said, understanding arriving like a knife into a sheath. "For the young, for anyone who needs to remember what their hands did when their mouths didn't know how," Arya said. They framed the carved slate in a border of old ship metal hammered flat. Vekar brought out a chain of the House of Peaks and fastened it across the top. They hung it where the morning light first entered the hall, where it would glow every dawn like fire discovering new ore. When the cubs burst in, smelling of rain and cooked meat, the new weight on the wall pulled them like gravity. Raka stopped dead. He stared. His ears shook. A sound came out of him that Arya would one day learn had no human equivalent. It translated closest to, "You saw me and made the seeing not die." He turned to her and bared his teeth. A Zah'ri smile is a terrifying thing if you don't know where to look. Arya looked at his eyes, not his teeth, and bowed. That was the morning the fights began. The Dominion schools rose in glass like growing bones. The halls shone with the promise of heat and food. Banners unfurled showing the block perfection of Dominion script, the way it folded meaning into shapes that didn't need mouths anymore. The envoys were everywhere, dressed like gravity, promising a future in which Zah'ri claws typed contracts, and their hunts were replaced with aquaculture, and their songs with symposiums. They offered credit chips and demonstration vaults filled with things Zah'ri had always been told were for other species. A few elders went first. They learned quickly. Zah'ri learned quickly because they have to. Their packs followed, half in curiosity and half in the fear of being left behind when a new river splits the land you thought you knew. Arya did not make speeches. She had been raised to hate speeches. Instead, she made ink. She taught law words one at a time: claim, title, restitution, breach, not like bullets but like seeds. She taught them with stories, the only device old enough for predators and prey both to accept. She sat cross-legged on the floor and told in simple human cadence of a fisherman who loaned a net to a neighbor and what happened when the neighbor sold the fish and would not share. She explained in the language of bones how to record the loan so that the court, any court, would recognize it. She did the same for hunts shared and owed, for wounds inflicted and paid. The elders disliked the slow pace. A few scoffed, growling that the envoy school promised mastery in a week. Arya nodded as if they had reminded her of something precious. "And if the envoy school leaves?" she asked quietly. "If the skiffs leave when the mines empty and their credit chips cycle home, if their power flickers, what then?" "Then we break their doors and take their food," one elder said, not flippant but factual. "And the contracts you signed with them for 9 winters. The claims they record to your water, your ore, your own run paths. The courts they bring to judge the breaking of their doors. You will not break paper with teeth." Silence like weather. The Zah'ri ambivalent eyes did not blink. But after that silence, a few elders sent their cubs to Arya's hall every dawn. Not many. Enough. The House of Peaks closed its doors by night but opened them by morning, and the carving of Raka's almost name drank light until the room itself seemed to wake. Raka, for his part, became a problem. He argued. He sharpened his Terran standard on other cubs' mistakes. He made the S sound so perfectly that Arya's throat ached. He asked questions the elders disliked because they were not a predator's kind. What does peace taste like, and why do humans cry in songs? Because of him, and because of the framed page, a new habit crept into the Zah'ri hall. The cubs who struggled brought their wrong pages to Arya. She looked at them and did not correct them at once. She found the place where the muscle of a letter had tried and failed. She named it. She told a story about it. Sometimes they carved those pages too when the failing had taught something everyone needed to carry. The walls became a museum of mistakes that had refused to die. On Zah'ra, such walls are churches. Predictably, this offended the Dominion. The envoy came to Arya's hall without asking permission. Her boots clicked on the stone like an insect with ideas. Vekar met her just inside the door and did not move. She walked around him, slender body a wedge. Her eyes landed on the framed carved slate. She inhaled. "What is this?" she asked. "A page," Arya said, stepping from between two ranks of cubs. "A page that failed in exactly the way we needed." "You have worshippers," the envoy said. "That is dangerous, teacher." "I have students," Arya said. The envoy stood with her hands behind her back. Her gaze tasted the walls, carvings, the careful games of letters on slates. "We have been generous," she said. "Your hall remains because I am patient, but the Zah'ri young are not cattle to be herded into your archaic script. Their future is with us. Their contracts will be recognized across the arm if they sign in our hand." "I know your hand," Arya said. "I have worn it around my throat and pretended it was jewelry. It bought us water and then trained us not to drink." The envoy shifted focus, looking at the cub's voice softening. She spoke in Terran first, then Zah'ri, her accent clean either way. "Children," she said, "what she teaches you is a way to be small. Your voices will carry as far as your lungs. What I bring you will carry as far as the court walls of a dozen systems. In our script, a contract's shadow is as good as a wall." Raka stood. He stepped between Arya and the envoy like a cub who knew his den was a thing you defended even if you were mostly teeth and breath. "She taught me the word for what you do," he said. "Paper that eats." The envoy's smile was almost kind. "You have claws, use them to sign power, little knife." She looked to Arya again. "I will not order you to close. That would make you martyr, and I dislike inefficiency. Instead, I will starve you. I will make your hall an old song. My schools will feed every cub who attends. My schools will train them to make their parents rich enough to buy mercy for their cousins, who will come to you then." "Those who are not hungry for food," Arya said. "Those who are hungry for a mouth their enemies cannot so shut." The envoy's eyes flashed. For a heartbeat, Arya saw past the practiced softness, a girl who had survived a palace of knives by becoming one. "Teach," the envoy said. "Teach harder." She was gone before Arya could answer, the wind she left behind smelling of expensive fabric and distant orbit. The hunger began the next day. Arya came early. The hall smelled faintly of smoke. Her chest tightened. Then she rounded the first arch and saw Raka and 3 other cubs hauling in baskets of roots and meats, tongues out, laughing. Vekar carried a pot the size of a birth story. He set it on a stone stove that Arya hadn't known existed and blew on the coals like he was kissing a thunderhead. The fire opened like an eye. "We eat at the House of Peaks," Vekar said matter-of-factly when he saw her look. "We do not dine at the House of Broken Knives." Arya's throat closed up so fast she had to pretend to cough. "You will starve yourself," she said. "We remember winter," Vekar said simply. "We remember how to share." The hall filled with steam and spice, and the sound of cubs trying to behave like they weren't happy. Arya taught with a bowl in her hand, pointing at letters with the end of a bone spoon. Every time a cub wrote something worth framing, the other cubs howled and thumped the floor until the hall shook, which the elders endured with calm, because there are worse sounds than the sound of young things praising each other. Meanwhile, the Dominion schools filled. They filled so quickly that the skiffs had to call more skiffs. They taught block echo, meaning how to make a thought into a box and mail it across space. They taught fast and clean, and contracts began to bear Zah'ri names in block script, and the bank stones gleamed with credits that smelled like other worlds. Arya waited for the fracture. She did not pray to anything. She trusted long odds and small mistakes framed large. It came when she expected it would, in a room too clean, under lights that never turned yellow, with a contract whose clause required the Zah'ri to pay interest in meat they no longer hunted, because hunting had been outlawed in the city core for public cleanliness. The heirs of Dominion had done this before. Bring prosperity. Remove the habits that made independence possible. Claim the shortfall as breach. Harvest. Word spread down the gorge like poison as Zah'ri learned their contracts had been held in a court 2 systems away, a court nobody here could attend even if they could speak block script into meaning. The Dominion skiffs began to drift around the edges of town like sharks re-evaluating their patience. Arya met Vekar on the rim at twilight. He looked older than stone. "We will fight," he said. It was not threat or hope, it was a weather report. "You will," Arya said, "and some of you will die in rooms where dying does not help. You cannot claw a court across systems. You can, however, read it. If you read it, you can find a small door in a wall that pretends not to have doors. I can't promise it, but I can teach you to look." He looked at her with a weariness she had never seen on a Zah'ri face. "Why do you fight our fights?" "Because I fought them as a child and learned that losing turns you into your enemy if you're not careful," she did not say. "Because if you learn to read the way we read, the Dominion has to kill 1,000 Ariacades to shut you up," she said instead. "You are one Ariacade," Vekar observed. She smiled without teeth. "You keep saying that like it's bad news." They fought, not in the alleys first, in the halls. Arya took her students to the Dominion school doors and told them to enroll for exactly 1 week. She told them to listen not to lesson but to assumptions. She taught them to sit in clean chairs like spies. They copied blocks of script into slates with hands that had learned letters under a roof of teeth. They asked questions the instructors chose not to hear. What clause governs the clause that governs the meat we don't hunt? The instructors said words like reevaluation and adjustment. The Zah'ri cubs folded those words into knives without telling anyone. At night, they came back to Arya's hall. They drew blocks and translated them into old Terran letters, which forced the blocks to breathe its air and glow where the trick lay. They traced the path of obligation through jutting lozenges and pointing arrows. They discovered, to their quiet delight, that the heirs of Dominion had misfiled a log. They had claimed a right to the Gorge River that an older treaty with a mining colony had already secured in perpetuity for whoever maintained a bridge at its narrowest point. "A bridge," Raka said, "look up abrupt and wild." "We can maintain a bridge. We can build one," Vekar said. "We can name it after Ariacade if the court likes poetry." The court did not like poetry, it liked documents, but documents Arya could make now that her letters had learned Zah'ri hands. She wrote a petition that used block script only as escort. The petition itself was in Terran standard letters, simple, ugly, loud. It said, "You cannot sell what is already under a different name, and our name is here, carved in stone and carried by those who risk." They sent it in a skiff paid for by 10 families selling 10 winter furs. They waited. The Dominion envoy walked the streets in new boots. She held herself the way a person does when she already knows the verdict. When the verdict came, it was middle victory, which is the only real kind. The court denied Dominion claim to the river outright and remanded the meat clause back to Zah'ra on the grounds that enforcement was impossible without violating local tradition and causing unrest detrimental to trade. It left other clauses intact. It did not apologize. It did not sign in Terran letters. It did not respect what Arya wished it would. It simply backed off from one thing it had been prepared to take. The House of Peaks howled. The sound rolled down the gorge like an old avalanche and up the other side so the carrion birds wobbled on their perches. The carving of Raka's page caught morning light and seemed to burn. The envoy came to Arya without guards. Her face held something like respect spliced with a bitter tendon. "You took a small piece of my knife," she said. "You made the Zah'ri look where they were not meant to." "No one is meant not to," Arya said. "You think you're a hero," the envoy said, not unkindly. "No," Arya said. "The hero is a mistake we decided to frame." The envoy's gaze flicked to the carved page. She huffed out a laugh she didn't want. "I would have made a good teacher," she said, so quiet that Arya almost didn't hear. "You still can," Arya said, "because there are knives you only put down by giving them a sheath." The envoy's jaw tightened. She looked at the gorge, the city with its unclean streets and its banners that were nothing but claw marks. "This place will kill me if I stay," she said. "It will kill all of us if we pretend to own it," Arya said. She left. Her skiff stayed for now, but its belly plates opened less often. The Dominion schools emptied a little, not enough to collapse. The House of Peaks filled more, not enough to call it winning. That was not the point. The point was momentum redirected like a river pushed with many small stones. Raqqa grew. He grew the way Zah'ri do when fed stories and meat. He lost his cub fat. His claws filed to the strong blunt of someone who uses them for real things. He started to lead parts of class. Arya watched him with the odd ache of a teacher who knows she will not see the end of a child's road and continues anyway. One evening, a storm came. Not weather, metal. The heirs of Dominion declared a seizure of debt holdings off-world and a skiff from a minor warlord. Domino's orbit is always a school for lesser killers. Took that as permission to raid Zah'ra by night. The first explosion blew open the outer market. The second hit a tower and stitched it like it was a sail. The alarms changed shape from hunger to danger. Zah'ri flowed into the streets with knives and old weapons. The run, which had always been the young learning their bodies, became a language of survival. Arya grabbed her satchel and the chain that hung Raqqa's page and dragged both toward the inner hall. The ceiling cracked. Dust fell like the end of a song. She found Vekar at the door with 2 spears in his hands and the calm of a man who has been waiting for this particular pain his entire life. "Stay inside," he said without looking at her. "No," she said before her fear could learn how to speak. "Let me try the other way." The other way was sound. She ran to the wall of carved mistakes. She tore down 3 and thrust them into Raqqa's arms. He stared. "Teacher, carry them," she said. "The run routes, hang them at the entrance to the alleys. The off-worlders can't read our smells. They will read what we force them to read." Raqqa bared his teeth. "I understand." They moved like wind. Arya ran into streets she'd memorized with her skin, planting framed mistakes where light would catch them even through smoke and the hazard glow of Dominion targeting. She threw a page onto a low roof and watched a squad of warlord raiders hesitate beneath it, perplexed by the sudden noise of their confusion. Words can make hesitation. Hesitation makes a new run. Zah'ri packs fell on raiders like silence falls on a lie. The warlord skiff tried to lift. Vekar put a spear through its intake with the casual throw of a man pulling a thorn. Fire blossomed, choked, died. The skiff slammed onto a roof and held there like a dead insect, legs twitching. When the smoke thinned, a dozen Zah'ri lay in the alleys, eyes closed, blood turning the dust into memory. Arya knelt by them and did what humans do in such rooms, remember their names in a rhythm her mother had taught her. Vekar stood with both hands on his spear like a staff. The envoy came after dawn with a small medical unit. She did not try to take over. She did not call it a riot. She knelt beside Arya and helped smooth a dead cub's ears. "My house," she said without looking up, "would kill me for being here. My house would kill me for teaching you this," Arya said, gesturing at the dead with a breath. "We came all this way to learn the same lesson. That our houses are made of meat," the envoy said. "They saved who could be saved. They sang. They didn't call it singing. They called it something else that translated to, moving the weight to where the floor understands. After the smoke, the House of Peaks wall grew. They framed new pages. The first was a child's scrawl that had been found under a collapsed beam, miraculously unburnt. It read help in letters so wrong that only someone who had taught those letters could recognize them. They framed it and hung it by the door. The second was a shard from a Dominion contract, torn and translated into Terran letters by a clawed hand that wanted others to see the trap. The third was a list of names, written by many hands, some steady, some smeared by grief. They kept teaching. Arya kept her routine like a blade, wake before light. Practiced the low sounds of Zah'ri language until her throat ached. grind ink, break bread, open the hall. It was a human prayer arranged in logistics. Some days the hall flooded with cubs who thought learning felt like hunting. Some days it was just Raka, and the carved pages watching her try not to be tired. On those quiet days, she told Raka stories of Earth. He liked the ones about climbing stairs in old cities because there were no cliffs there to make you earn your view. He liked the one about her mother teaching her to say words out loud in the cellar when the sirens tried to erase the alphabet by detonation. He liked the one about a boy who wrote his sister's name in chalk on a wall so everyone would know the person the disease had tried to make into silence. He listened the way Zah'ri listen at the edge of a run, meanness in it, tenderness in it, precision in it. One day when the rain made the hall smell like sorrow, he asked, "Why do you frame our wrong things and not your right ones?" "Because right things behave," Arya said. "Wrong things have teeth." He considered that the way a young sword considers its own balance. "When I lead," he said, stumbling once and correcting himself, "I will frame wrong things first." "When you lead," Arya said, smiling, "the Dominion will leave this gorge even if it still clings to your contracts." "When I lead," he said in a voice being born, "we will make contracts that smell like our dens." Time, trickster, ran. The court messages came less often. The envoy spoke less. The Zah'ri traded meat and metals in markets that remembered how to count without external permission. Their mistakes became their schools. Their framed pages became invitations to other clans. "Come, bring your wrong, make it ours." There were falls. They overeagerly signed a treaty with a mercenary guild and had to fight themselves free in 3 nights of broken bone. A half-bridge collapsed because a cub had measured in human foot length without knowing it. Arya cried when she thought no one was watching, and a cub brought her a horn drink she couldn't keep down but accepted with the seriousness of a sacrament. Then came the day Arya knew would be written on whatever passed here for calendar. The heirs of Dominion called for a tribunal to finalize Zah'ra's economic integration. It would mean permanent courts in the city, permanent skiffs over the gorge, permanent experts, with soft hands cutting contracts like knives cut fruit. Vekar came to Arya's hall that morning with a collar of stones too heavy even for his neck. He set it on her table. "I have led the House of Peaks through hunting and through the paper war," he said. "Now I go to the tribunal to be made less. On the way I may be taken." "You mean killed," Arya said. "I taught you to use mouths where claws want to be." He smiled without showing teeth, her smile learned, misunderstood, given back. "If I am taken," he said, "the cubs need their den. You will keep it warm." "I am one woman," Arya said, and then caught herself. "And there are many of us." "There are many of you," he echoed, touching the carved page, "because you frame mistakes." He left with 2 bodyguards who moved like river shadows. The hall breathed like a throat. Word came bad. The envoy met Vekar at the tribunal door, they said. She tried to get him a seat. A group of lesser heirs, men who like attention more than power, blocked him, demanded he sign a preliminary oath of compliance in the block script, knowing he could not translate the depth of its traps without his human teacher. It was petty, stupid cruelty. Zah'ri do not understand petty until it bites them. Raka stood. He picked up the framed page with Arya's name carved wrong by his cub hand. He slung it on his back with a rope and did not look at her when she whispered. "Don't, I was your mistake," he said. "You framed me." He ran. Arya ran after because sometimes the only prayer is to keep something within the reach of your voice. They reached the tribunal plaza as twilight made the banners into teeth again. Dominion guards formed a half-ring about the stairs. Zah'ri crowded the lower steps, growling low, an earthquake held by a leash. The envoy stood to one side, jaw tight, watching a man in a gold-trimmed coat read the oath of compliance into a recorder with relish. Vekar stood before him, hands empty. He spoke Zah'ri, which the recorder ignored because it understood only Dominion voices. "A court that demands a man lose his name to be heard," he said, "has already lost." The man waved. "Sign," he said. Raka shouldered through the crowd and leapt onto a pillar of stone halfway up the steps. He ripped the chain off the carved page. He held it up so the light struck it and the letters of Aria's name. The wrong A, the hinged R, the nearly spear I, the strong last A, blazed like the mouth of a cave. He shouted in Terran standard, his accent a blade. "You will hear us in our own mistake." The sound went through the crowd like a thrown spear that keeps flying. Zah'ri voices took it up and threw it back. The envoy's eyes went wet and she blinked fast because there was no use for such water in this place. Aria found herself on the stairs without remembering how her feet had decided. She stood beside Vekar and let the recorder catch her throat. "My name is Aria Cade," she said, clear and slow, and the pillar of Raka's page made each letter seem carved into air. "You will not make these people sign what they cannot read. You will allow an adjournment for translation. You will face their mistakes and frame them, or you will not call yourselves heirs." The gold-trim coat laughed. Uncertain, he looked to the envoy for a cue. She stared at him like a cousin discovered a talent for drowning. She spoke a single sentence in the quiet language of the very high-born, the one that never reached recordings. He paled. He turned to the recorder and said in block script, "Adjourned for translation." The crowd exhaled like an animal that had been held under and was now allowed lungs again. Zah'ri knelt and slammed their palms to stone once twice, until the plaza sounded like a continent pulling itself together. Vekar bowed to Aria in front of everyone. Some of the older Zah'ri made a sound with their tongues that meant, "We admit the change in the wind and choose not to fight it." Raka climbed down shakily. He thrust the carved page at Aria's hands without meeting her eyes, as if it were guilt. The rope had burned rings on his shoulders. She took it with both palms and kissed the edge of the frame the way her grandmother had kissed the lintel after long absences. "Keep it," she told him. "You will need it." "I will hang it in the den," he said, voice unsteady with triumph and fear both. "So the cubs who do not yet exist will know how close we came to losing the shape of a human." The tribunal that followed was long and not clean, and its compromises tasted like old tin, but it was conducted with translation. The Zah'ri's mistakes did not bar their entry. Their contracts preserved hunts and allowed meat taxes in blood weight rather than credits. The Dominion obtained trade routes and naming rights they could bear bragging about at their parties. Both sides left angry at parts of it. Both sides left with less blood on them than they'd expected. Aria slept for a day and a night. When she woke, the hall smelled of warm bread and ink. Raka sat with his back against the carved page, eyes closed, hands bleeding from making too many copies of the laws they had won. "Stop," she said. He opened one eye. "We do not stop," he said, a little of Vekar in his voice. "No," she said, "we endure." He grinned. He touched the copper disc at her throat with one claw tip. "Of all your wrong things," he said, "I am most fond of this." "It's not wrong," she protested. "It is," he said, pleased. "It is a hard circle around a soft history. That is wrongness done well." He looked at the page. "We need more frames." "We will run out of walls," she said. "Then we will build houses only for framing," he said, only half jesting. And they did. Years do not flow the same way on worlds that never learned to count winter the way Earth did. But seasons still pass. The heirs of Dominion stayed and became less a blade and more a spoon, still sharp at one edge, but useful if you kept it in the right drawer. The Zah'ri learned to file block script down until it couldn't bite. They made courts their dens the way wolves claim a ruin. Aria grew older and learned the names of young who had children, and felt a tiredness in her bones that was not fear but use. The wall of the House of Peaks became to Zah'ri what fountains had been in old human cities, a place to meet and be near what you wanted without admitting you needed it. Criers repeated the old mistakes allowed to remind the young what verbs mattered. Travelers from other houses came to press their foreheads to the stone of Raka's first page, as if the letters might pass endurance through bone. On the day Arya decided to leave, the sky was absolutely ordinary. She had taught until her voice frayed. She had eaten food that was no longer a joke to her mouth. She had negotiated 6 small treaties and 1 small wedding that had nothing to do with her except that 2 Zah'ri wanted their names in Terran script somewhere an old woman would see. She had been gifted a spear that she had no business using and a cloak she used too often. It was time. She told Vekar at twilight. He nodded and said good, because predators say this to those they will miss so the missing rest easier. She told Raka at dawn. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he went to the wall and took down the framed page of her name as he'd first written it. He pressed it into her hands. "Carry," he said. "I can't," she said. "It belongs here. Your name lives here now, teacher," he said, voice steady, eyes not. "It does not need stone to say so. Take it. Earth will fail one day, we all do. Someone there will need to see a wrong thing that saved a world that was not theirs." She held the weight. It pulled at her bones like gravity knows what you owe it. She knew he was right. She also knew his hands would feel the absence for a while and hate her for it the way all leaving is hated even if it is right. "I will return," she said, knowing it was the kind of promise that does not control time but shapes hope. "Good," he said and smiled terrifyingly. They walked together to the edge of the gorge where the shuttle would take her to a station that had never learned how to be kind. The envoy waited there, older now. Power makes some people younger, but it had not done that to her. She touched Arya's shoulder in a gentle, skeptical way. "I have been promoted," she said. "Off Zah'ra, they called what we did here a success. They are wrong, but their wrongness benefits you." "Frame it," Arya said, half laughing. The envoy's eyes softened. "Take care. Teacher, you too." They hugged like comrades briefly, arms sure, and then stepped back before someone could write a poem about it. Raka did not hug. Zah'ri do not much. He stood head high and uttered the edge hum they used to bless knives before the hunt. It lifted the hair on Arya's arms. It put a thread through her and tied it to Zah'ra so that even when she died, there would be a path somewhere in the stone remembering how she had walked. She boarded the shuttle with the framed page like a shield. As it lifted, the city became a map of light and mistakes framed against stone, a long song with no chorus and endless verses, which is to say a life. Space took her. Stations always smell like things that agree they are higher than planets. She ignored the perfume and the steel. She found the small post for human teachers passing between worlds, the one nobody visited because nobody wanted to be seen there, and she set Raka's page on the wall. She wrote beneath it in a handwriting that had been corrected 1,000 times by children tougher than wars. "If you are tired, this is your proof. If you are afraid, this is your proof. If you want a reason to keep teaching when everything speaks court, this is your proof." She stayed long enough to see 3 other teachers stand before it and cry without making sound. She stayed long enough to send copies to archives that would pretend not to understand why such wrongness mattered. And then she went on, because this is the work, not to conquer, but to endure. Sometimes, in the night of a ship between stars, she would wake with the taste of Zah'ra dust in her mouth. She would hear the run that meant life and death practicing together. She would remember children writing her name wrong and getting closer, closer, not because she mattered, but because a shape needed filling and they had hands. When news came through the thin nets, of a storm on Zah'ra, of a famine averted because block script had been bent into a storage claim, of Raka elected to lead a council that did not exist the first time she stood in that hall, she would breathe out the kind of breath that counts. Once, a courier brought her a small package without return. Inside was a coin made from old ship metal. On one side, the House of Peaks had stamped their claw mark. On the other, in letters wrong and right interwoven, Arya. She wore it beside the copper disc. On a world far from any she had called home, she stood before a class that had never seen Zah'ri and told the story of a predator world and a framed mistake, of lawyers and knives, of a court forced to hear a voice it had been designed to ignore. She told it plain because plain carries further than pretty. She told it to a boy who had not spoken in 3 weeks because his father could not afford the school anymore, whose hand came up at the end like a blade, finally remembering it is not a spoon. "How do I know," the boy asked, "if my wrong thing is worth framing?" "You don't," Arya said. "You frame it anyway. If it saves one child that is not you, it was worth carving." He wrote a word then. It wasn't right. She loved it because of that. Years later, long after the envoy had become the kind of person ministers whisper to in corridors, long after Raqqa had opened a school in the den where he had first written love in a human alphabet, long after Vekhar had died in a bed with his hand on a spear he didn't need anymore, a young Zah'ri came to Earth. She wore a cloak of gray chain and a grin that would terrify armies. She came into a human hall of learning and found a stone on the wall framed in domestic wood, not the house of Peak's ship metal. On it 4 letters leaned and hinged and became spear and stood. Beneath it a brass plate said, "Gift of the Zah'ri." She put her palm to it, eyes shutting as reptiles sometimes do when they have decided not to bite. A voice behind her said, "Do you read Terran?" She turned. The man was an old human whose posture apologized for old wars. He wore a coin at his throat. He gestured to the stone. "It's wrong," she said. "Yes," he said, delighted. "Isn't it perfect?" She laughed the way Zah'ri laugh when they think about meat and memory in the same breath. "Yes," she said. "Yes, it is." He guided her down a hall. He told her of a teacher he had never met, whom station gossip named Field Mother, but who insisted she was a child stretched thin. He told her of a day when a court listened. He told her of a world that thought it was a ribcage and became a choir. At the end of the hall, on a table beneath a window where the light worked as if paid, lay a book. The Zah'ri picked it up with claws that could shred and did not. On the first page, written in Arya Cade's careful plain letters, was a dedication to the cubs who tried to write my name and made a future. The Zah'ri closed the book and held it to her chest the way hunters hold a blade they trust. Outside the window Earth was itself, flawed and glorious. Above it, ships moved like slow punctuation. Between them hung a promise that does not belong to empires or courts, but to every hand that reaches and fails and reaches again. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.